everyone, this is Philosophy Fuel, Stefan Bertram and Ben Burgess, and we are so back, as they say. And here today we're going to be talking about the 1 year anniversary of the Great Alaska Flood Operation.
Yeah,
I think tomorrow on Twitter is going to be 0% good takes. I think it's going to be
yeah.
100% bad takes.
I might go so far as 199, but sure.
Is it
Uh,
going to be? Are you going to write one, Ben? Is it going to be
yeah,
good?
yeah, yeah, exactly. I am actually writing something for Jacobin about the anniversary, which the what I say is that you know glory to the martyrs. This was obviously a morally unimpeachable and strategically brilliant thing to do that
Back
worked
fear.
out very well for everybody. Yeah, no, I think
Yeah, I think the problem with having like a good take beyond the fact that lots of people just aren't inclined to do so is
uh,
that you do come off as like I think the correct take makes you come off as like a massive lib who's just like actually everyone should do things specifically in the manner I think they should.
yeah,
But they
yeah,
should have,
yeah. Yeah, I mean, look, it is actually a pretty boring normie take in the sense that I'd like a bit less mass murder going forward all around. Um, and I think that at a certain point you have to actually stop killing people unless of course you don't have to because you have inflies and infinite diplomatic cover. But yeah, it's that 10-7 was bad, and the never ending series of 10-7s in retaliation have been even worse.
Israel is doing a crazy thing where they're like, if we just commit enough war crimes, then people can't really produce any kind of care for the amount of war crimes we do.
Yeah, I mean that's the old Stalin line, right? The probably apocryphal, right? But the one death is a tragedy, a million
Yeah,
deaths is a statistic. That's yeah. People do stop. At a certain volume, right? You do get numb to it.
yeah. I mean, but it also works for like Israeli lives, right? Like there was that shooting gun attack in Tel Aviv,
uh,
which was in the news, which killed like 7, 8, 9 people, which was in the news for like maybe 2 hours.
yeah,
While if it happened 15 months ago, would have been the top story for like 3 days.
right. Yeah, no, that
Zionism
is
not very good for the Jews either. But
sure.
I
That,
lied, chat. We're not going to be talking about
yeah,
Israel
yeah.
or any of
I,
that stuff. We're
yeah,
going to be talking about movies.
yes, indeed. Yeah, and not even Middle Eastern movies unless one comes up in a way I can't think of. But
Well, I watched June yesterday, which is a very notable Arabic film, as we all know.
okay, yeah, no, I do think it's actually very extremely to use that frame in not good for the Jews in the long run. I'm actually going to be on the main show tomorrow night for the anniversary. I'm just going to do the talk that I gave at the encampment at Princeton in the spring, and I also gave a version of it to Wayne State YDSA and Metro Detroit DSA a couple months before that. I'll just do that on the show, and I do get into that a little bit, right? That it's like, among other things, even if you sort of have the moral tunnel vision to only care about Jewish safety, it does strike me that empirically this has worked out very badly for that goal. But in any case, yeah. So we are going to be talking about a vastly less murdery topic today, which is movies and aesthetics. More generally, right? So some general stuff about aesthetics and application to movies. So this is a essay that I've been toying with the idea of writing for a very long time. I think because I was in New York, not when the hell was this? This was like early last year because it was I think it was when I was there for the weekend of uh, the GTAA
You
TIL.
said at least for the second encounter, you'd already started the Substack.
Yeah, I'd already started the Substack, so this was in 2023, but it was very early 2023 because that was the weekend of the live show we did. So I think that was actually like late January 2023 or something.
Mm.
And I was having this conversation with Cale Brooks, formerly of Jacobin's YouTube page, and his girlfriend, and we were talking about this previous argument I'd had with Cale, where I laid out this whole view about good movies and awesome movies, and he was like, "Oh, you should write that up for your Substack." And I said, "Oh, I might actually do that at some point." And so I've been kind of thinking about it since then, right, for the last, you know, year and 9 months since that conversation. And so last week I actually did it.
What's your favorite film where no one dies?
What is my favorite film where no one dies? That is a good question. Um,
Or maybe more generously, no one is killed.
who was killed? Yeah. Uh, yeah. Yeah. Right.
Did you see The Favorite
No, I haven't seen that.
about Queen Anne? About gay Queen Anne?
I mean, the other night I saw The Big Chill, which is a very good movie where almost nobody dies. There's
Mm.
one guy who dies at the beginning, and then the rest of the movie is about people getting together for his funeral. So that's
Ah.
that's that's a one death movie, but the death is actually pretty important to the plot. It's a very good movie.
I mean,
But
same thing with Ex Machina, which I really like, where only
oh my
one
god,
person dies.
I love Ex Machina. I think did I? Yeah, did I talk about that in a previous Substack? I don't think I did. I have which might actually be
I think we've only talked about
worth.
time travel movies before.
Yeah, I talked about time travel movies before, but yeah, I do. Yeah, I do have a whole thing about Ex Machina. I mean, that would actually be a good movie to talk about in the Substack because it's a very philosophy example rich movie. There's Mary the Color Scientist and
Mm.
all of that. Chinese Room and all that stuff. Uh, and it's and also Sean Vids has a really bad take on it. In a video I could talk
Mm.
about that. So yeah, this is actually a good idea. I should do an Ex Machina. But yeah, I love Ex Machina, and
Oh, no,
there.
I did a June podcast when you weren't here one week, which I
Okay,
think might be my best solo episode.
gotcha. Oh yeah, yeah. I remember when you did that. Yeah, I mean, in Ex Machina. Actually, I'm trying to think. I mean, implicitly. Oh no, there is at least one. There's one death and the
One
promise.
implied horrible
Yeah,
starvation to death at the end.
yeah, exactly. One on screen death, one extremely gruesome implied future death.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I guess that's two. I mean, I think my all-time favorite horror movie only has one death, or no, two. Actually, I guess very similarly, right? So The Shining, has
Mm.
there's only one guy. There's only one person gets killed in The Shining, and only two people die overall. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, like, I guess if I really tried to narrow it down to movies where zero people die, I mean, one, I'll just be upfront about the fact that most movies that I like are not, in that category. But I would probably have to start thinking about comedies, right? Those
Yeah,
are
because
the.
it was a question of like to try and get into like your actual thesis of is there any kind of like high drama kind of works of quality film that are considered in this way where no one dies?
Yeah, right. I'm sure there are. I have to admit, none of them like pop into my head when I first start to think about this.
Does anyone
Uh,
die in the Shawshank Redemption? I guess at the end.
oh, hold on. Shawshank Redemption. That is a good question. Maybe not, actually. I'd have to. It's been a long time since I've seen it, but just kind of thinking through the basic events of the movie, if somebody does die, it must be a pretty minor plot point, right?
Yeah.
Because I don't know when there would have been. I mean, I'm sure if you started listing off uh, big famous movies where nobody dies that are pretty good movies, we could probably come up with like 20 of them that I'd be like, oh yeah, of course, I can't believe I didn't think of that.
I guess no
But
one dies in Raging Bull.
uh-huh, that seems right.
This is a boxing movie.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
it's funny, like you think, oh, Forrest
I
Gump,
mean,
but then there were
his
like
brain's kind of
5,000
gone, but
people
yeah,
die in Vietnam.
yeah, right. uh, yeah.
I don't know if Forrest Gump is even a good film though.
Yeah, I haven't seen it, I believe, since it was in the theater.
Hmm.
So I really couldn't tell you. I mean, I remember it was like a goofy movie. I don't, I don't know, what the star rating,
Timothy
I
Connison
would,
notes that
uh,
the
I would
warden
give to
kills
that.
himself.
Yeah, let's see. That sounds right.
That's how you get chat posting. You ask movie trivia questions.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, yeah. One of the prisoners was shot because he knew it was of Andy's innocence. So there we go. At least two people die in there. Oh, and of course, Andy is charged with killing his wife. But I don't know if that counts. If that's like before the actual death of the wife is
Before the
before the.
universe
I mean,
began.
you can't just count death existing in this universe as people dying in the movie, right?
Oh,
If somebody in the movie refers to like Abraham Lincoln having been assassinated in the 19th century, that doesn't mean that somebody died in that movie.
yeah.
And Forrest Gump has a Vietnam War scene anyway, so good.
Oh, did you miss me saying that? What I was saying was Forrest
Uh,
Gump. You think of Forrest Gump, but then actually like 5,000 people die in Forrest Gump during the War scene.
yeah, yeah. This is uh, actually hold on. This is a good point. There's let's see. Uh, so if yeah, it's the right, Jesus. So somebody mentioned Woody Allen, so it's like yeah, I think actually
Mm.
Annie Hall is probably one of my favorite movies, and nobody dies in Annie Hall unless I've just completely blanked on that part of the movie, right? But that's an amazing movie. I think, uh, yeah, it's there is, yeah, Rosemary's Baby is also a really good horror movie where almost nobody dies. There are like two deaths, I think, over the course of Rosemary's Baby, but it's not quite central, right,
Mm.
to what's going on. Like they really could have made a version of that movie where they got it down to zero, and
Mm.
and it would have been fine. Uh, yes,
So
Liam
Ben,
confirmed
what's
Annie Hall, no
what's the
deaths.
thesis? What
Yeah,
is the
sorry,
thesis
I
of
was
today?
I was I was in yeah. Now I'm obsessed with trying to figure out
Yeah, sorry, I asked the question which was too good.
which movies nobody died in. Yeah, no, right, okay. So here's the actual I the whole thing originates, right. So the conversation with Kale where he suggested I write this up was in January of 2023, but when I that all that all comes from when I had been in New York several months, I don't know, at least several months, a while earlier, and I had been trying to get Kale to go see Goodfellas with me. The person I was going to see it with ended up canceling, and we had and at a certain point in the course of that conversation, it's like, he had a lot of work to do, whatever. That's all fine. But he said, that was never really his favorite Scorsese anyway. And as I was thinking about that on my way back from the theater, uh, I came up with this very specific thesis about the character defect of Kale, and which I laid out for him when I got back to the apartment, which is that even though Kale is a huge film nerd, it seems to me that he only cares about whether movies are good, and of course I think it matters quite a bit whether movies are good. That's obviously something I care about, but it's not the only dimension of evaluation that I care about. I also care about whether they're awesome. And it seems to me that Kale doesn't put nearly enough weight on awesome. And yes, he denies the charges, but and he may be right. I actually acknowledge at the end of the essay that that this doesn't really fit him, but it's having made the challenge, I was thinking about this. It's like, okay, can I actually make a somewhat reasonable case for the distinction that I'm going for here? And it seems to me that the first question to ask is, well, hold on, is there even some sort of objective sense in which in good, right? I mean, like we have to make some kind of distinction between it, and I thought it was good in order for certainly in order for a distinction between good and some other non-good criteria of evaluation to even get off the ground in the first place. So
Right, because
that's
you can imagine a philosophy drug or an actual drug,
sure,
which,
yeah.
which makes you enjoy any film you watch, but that
That's
surely wouldn't force us to accept that all movies are good.
yeah, right, exactly. I mean, this is yeah, I think there are a lot of so this is why the full title of the essay with the little subtitle is good movies and awesome movies, some quasi-human reflections, since uh, the kind of classic the classic essay kind of wrestling with the issues that are being raised in the first part of this is David Hume's The Standard of Taste. And what Hume is wrestling with there, more or less, is that on the one hand, there's something that sort of feels off about talking about aesthetic facts. That there is a fact that some just to stick with our example movie is good, that it's better than other ones, etc. That's sort of we're say when we assert that, we're asserting something above and beyond or even just separate from our liking it. And I think there's a way of thinking about this where that actually that feels totally absurd, right? That it's I think some of the issue here is actually an issue you can raise for any kind of evaluative facts, because it could just as easily motivate meta-ethical skepticism, right? I mean, I was like to try to get students to sort of see the problem here. I'm like, okay, so if you think about shows like Law and Order and CSI, I'm sure these are all hopelessly dated, but whatever. There are, oftentimes the crime scene technology is way above what exists in real life, but you can suspend disbelief about it, right? That they, rather than like the way fingerprinting works in
Infinite resolution CCTV cameras.
exactly. That's the classic instance, right? That's like, oh my God, where are the extra pixels coming from, right? As you're focusing in and in and in, right? So yeah, you have the infinite resolution CCTV. It's like zoom in on that, right? And the way fingerprinting works in real life is like, oh, you got 300 partial matches, not here's the one and only match, for this fingerprint and etc. So the technology in these shows is way ahead of real life crime scene technology. But this is all stuff we can kind of suspend disbelief about. But here's something you could not suspend disbelief about: that if the CSI team comes out and they they like scan the like the corpses on the ground with the chalk around it, and they bring out some kind of machine and they scan it and say, oh, I see here that this killing was morally unjustified, right? Like it's like, no, clearly not, right? Because there's no physical, if morally unjustified is a property of events, it's certainly not an ordinary property of events. It's certainly not material in a sort of obvious and straightforward way. And so you could use this as like, I think there's some of the considerations that lead people to be skeptical of aesthetic facts could apply, to all sorts of, any kind of, normative or, abstract evaluation like that. But I think that that intuition tends to hit people particularly hard in the aesthetic case.
Hmm.
That maybe it's just because in the moral case, like,
Bringing up my scanner to see if it's a beautiful murder.
yeah. In the moral case, you can, I think at least maybe just the fact that nothing is actually right or wrong, or nothing's like things like that. Just I think maybe the fact that they sound so unappetizing on their face, just because of the moral weight we give that, uh, you know, probably makes fewer people initially inclined to that kind of extreme subjectivism about morality, that like that sort of AJ Ayer view that all you're saying when you say murder is wrong is boo murder. Um, but we in the aesthetic case, I think that a lot of people, I think maybe because it seems sort of like, yeah, saying that there's no distinction between, I personally uh, I personally dislike what you did, and I think what you did is morally wrong. Right? Saying that maybe sounds morally troubling, so maybe that's the only disanalogy. But so people don't want to say it. But maybe just because there is nothing like that in the aesthetic case, I think a lot of people, when you present it to them in the abstract, say, "Hey, do you think that there are objective truths about aesthetic quality?" A lot of people at that abstract level go straight for no, of course not. It's silly. Like what do you, how could there be objective truths about that? It's, what do we, there's like this is like the universe somehow, has this perspective, or is like, is the, is the gods enjoy it or not? Right. That's like, what is that?
No,
But
Noah's stone tablets, but it's just a list of the 100 greatest movies.
yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah. Yeah. As Moses on Mount Sinai gets the AFI top 100
Did I
list, but
say Noah? God.
you did say Noah. But yeah, well, uh, that makes it even more basic, right? I mean, this is in Orthodox Judaism, there are like 613 laws that are held to apply to Jews, but only seven for everybody else, and those are the ones that God gives to Noah after the flood, right? So it's the Noahide commandments. So yeah, that's like the version of, and there actually is like a weird thing like this, sort of the mirror image version of like Jews for Jesus is there are like a few of these weird, they call them Noahide congregations, which are like Gentiles who've decided that they think that Orthodox Judaism is correct, but they're not going to convert to it. It's just, you're just, you just have to follow these seven things. But yeah, so yeah, it seems totally absurd to be an aesthetic realist to many people, right? Like this is like certainly my experience of like talking about this with like introductory level students over the years, or for that matter, talking about this with like academics who come out of something other than philosophy. Like this is a super commonly held, very strongly held intuition on that level of abstraction. But the other half of the kind of what Hume is wrestling with in the Standard of Taste essay is that, okay, nothing is actually nothing is actually aesthetically better or worse than anything, right? All there is personal taste. Um, that that might sound obviously true at the kind of intellectual view from 10,000 feet, but then when you zoom down to start thinking about specific examples, it no longer sounds true. It actually sounds silly, right? So he says so, like
Yeah, like
human.
if you had someone that you took them to a gallery and showed them all the
Yeah,
great masters and whatever, then you took them to another place and showed them like a series of child drawings. If they couldn't appreciate the difference between the two of them, it wouldn't just be that you think they were mistaken, but you probably assume they have some kind of brain injury.
yeah, right. I mean, if you, yeah, so like the example Hume gives in his essay is uh, that asserting that that the poetry of that John Milton was no better than, and then he has some name that like I had to Google, and I'm pretty sure everybody's had to Google for like a very long time, right?
I googled that guy, but then I also read his life story,
Oh yeah,
uh, and it was great stuff. He was indentured to a dancing master,
okay.
and was convinced he was the bastard son of the Duke, who was passed off on someone with the same surname as the Duke, which seems like what we would describe in the 21st century as cope.
Sure, yeah. uh, yeah, that's fair. But yes, uh I assume, despite knowing who this guy is, though, that you don't frequently turn to his work for its poetic greatness. Um, and certainly to modernize the examples, like this is the kind of thing I've often done in the past when I've taught this at the Hume essay in classes. Be like, okay, yeah, who here thinks that like nothing is objectively good or bad? It's just about personal taste. People raise their hands. Okay, so keep your hand up if like if somebody told you that they thought that Transformers 2 Revenge of the Fallen was better than The Godfather, that's like seems like a rational opinion, yes or no, right? Like and all of that confident aesthetic subjectivism just totally falls away in the face of specific examples, because when you get right down to it, when we've like descended from the view from 10,000 feet and we're actually down on the ground forming aesthetic judgments, nobody actually thinks that all aesthetic judgments are equally reasonable. Everybody actually thinks, when you get down to concrete cases, that some things are clearly better than others. And I also suggest that uh, if you just sort of attend to ordinary discourse about movies or any other art form, obviously, but movies is the one that focused on for this essay. Um, People, like just ordinary speakers in non-philosophical contexts, make this distinction very easily and very fluidly all the time, right? I mean, like they take it for granted, actually. If you say, uh, oh, I just um yeah, I just feel like going home tonight and reheating some pizza and watching a bad movie, right? Then you're clearly making a distinction between preference and quality, right? That what you
Right?
think.
If you said that and then we're like, and that's the best possible decision I could make,
Yeah,
you'd be like, are you?
yeah, right. I clearly, like, yeah, I think everybody normally understands this distinction just fine, right? Or when we say that people, when we say that somebody has good taste in movies, or we say that somebody else has shit taste in movies, right? Then either way, it's like, well, what's the structure of this? Presumably, we're making a statement about the way that their tastes align or fail to align with quality, right? That or you just say things like, I mean, anybody who watches a lot of movies, I'd be shocked if you never said this, right? It's like, oh, I really love such and such. I don't think it's a great movie, but right, like obviously, right? It'd be weird if you never said things like that. That's a distinction that everybody makes. So in if you think that and whatever, I give examples of like I will often tell people that like the that that the Keanu Reeves movie The Devil's Advocate is a movie that I like more than it deserves, right? It's like again, I don't think it's particularly amazing. I'm not saying it's bad, it's a flawed movie, but it gives me tremendous pleasure, right? So if you can find your way around these distinctions, as everybody can in ordinary conversation, but you also um, do see the problem, right? It's like, okay, well, wait a second. Are we talking about some kind of weird facts that live in like some like platonic heaven with the forms and the numbers, right? What is this, right? Like, as if this is like a metaphysical fact, this seems like a very strange thing to assert. So we say, okay, well, we don't want to assert some kind of strange metaphysical fact, but we also do want to acknowledge that this is a distinction that seems obviously correct. How do we navigate all that? And I think that Hume's attempt to do so is about as credible as anything I'm aware of, right? That people have said about this, which is to say, okay, there is a standard of taste against which you can make determinations about whether somebody has good or bad taste. You can make distinctions between what you liked and or what somebody else liked, or what a majority vote of us liked, and what you think is good and all that stuff. And you can do that without attributing the standard to the universe, just by saying, okay, well, it's what we're talking about in this case maybe are the sentiments about, for example, that would be held by people under, specific idealized circumstances. So, in other words, they have to have be familiar with enough other examples that they're not going to be just sort of easily impressed, by things that actually weren't, particularly good. They're going to have to kind of have time to collect their thoughts. People, Hume also says that that the standard is really brought out by thinking about not just sort of what impresses people in the time and place that it comes out, but by the judgments of posterity and future generations. And so I think that translating this, of course, not all of these things are gonna cleanly apply to the example of movies, because this is an art form that's existed for like well under 2 lifetimes of the average life expectancy of a contemporary American. So the bit about future generations perhaps isn't like isn't completely applicable. And also Hume says, okay, well, what impresses people, you could have like things that bias it in the reaction in the country or whatever, but then, what foreigners or posterity think. And of course, movie audiences these days are pretty instantly global, so that one's not too helpful either. But, contract,
I think it can apply to kind of foreign films that then come into like the West, right?
uh, yeah, I think it probably applies better to that than vice versa, right? Because,
I don't think we see trash Korean films. We just see the good ones.
yes, right. Yeah, yeah, I think that's almost certainly true, right? Yeah, we see Old Boy and whatever, but we don't, there's probably lots of things that might have even been popular in Korea for a brief amount of time, but like never actually make it to the West.
Like I'm
That
sure there's
seems
loads of trashy Korean horror that we just have no idea about unless you're a horror
right.
megastan.
Yeah, that definitely feels right to me. So yeah, and I think that like roughly the spirit of the distinction that that Hume is making is like, okay, what we're really, the distinction that we're gesturing at when we make these distinctions between I liked it and I think it was good, or I think such and such has good taste in movies or bad taste in movies or whatever. That distinction is roughly okay. Not do I like it? Do you like it? Do show of hands, majority of us like it, but how would people feel about it if they've seen enough similar movies that they're not going to be sort of easily impressed by it being the first of the kind they've seen, that they're not just being sort of influenced by the buzz about the movie when it first comes out, et cetera, right? And we can, and contracted the point about posterity to a more appropriate time scale, just like, look, it's less telling in terms of the ultimate standard what audiences or even critics think the week that something comes out than what they think about it in 10 years, or indeed if they're thinking about it at all in 10 years, or people have just completely forgotten about it in 10 years. So I think that if you think that this is something at least approximately like this, is probably the best way to make sense of, on the one hand, the intuition that like platonic facts about aesthetics seem silly, but on the other hand, the intuition that some movies are clearly better than others. That, if you think this is about the best we can do to navigate that distinction, is to make like roughly human kinds of distinctions here, then I actually think that my thesis from the original conversation with Kale is defensible here.
I mean, I would say that while I'm inclined to kind of, at least naturally, intuitionally agree with this, it does seem to basically just kind of move around the objective norm problem by kind of
Yeah.
relying on objective epistemic norms, which are the most acceptable to people, but it's not clear how they're qualitatively different simply on the face of things.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, so I think that,
Like the idea that we should believe we should have a higher regard for someone's opinion about a film if they watched it compared to if they didn't, um, relies on some kind of like objective epistemic ideas, which are very reasonable, but are still kind of normative ideas. And of course, with the example of Zizek, there are many good reviews of films by people who haven't watched them.
yeah, I mean, I think I don't know that I go so far as to say many, but I think he pulled it off in that instance. I definitely enjoyed the ending of that review. Yeah, I think, and that's the way to do it, right? Is just to frankly admit that you didn't see it and you're not going to. Yeah, I think that. How about so we could go two ways here. One is to like argue about epistemic objectivity. I do think that at least some of the problems with making sense of normativity aren't always as much of a problem when we're thinking about epistemic norms, if only because, and I'm not sure how much this move is going to help in this context. It might actually not help at all, but like just as a general matter, right? If only because it's, if you see, if you can sort of say, okay, it's easiest to make sense of normativity when we're ultimately talking about some kind of instrumental norm, right? That I have goal A, doing B is going to help me achieve A, right? It seems like there can be a straightforward empirical fact that doing B will help me achieve A, right? So that's the kind of normativity that's the easiest to make sense of. And so moral norms, for example, start to look more mysterious because doesn't seem, they might not seem to be like that. They might not seem to be
Right,
as direct.
structurally, moral norms are meant to not be hypothetical imperatives, otherwise they're not really moral.
Yeah, they're supposed to be categorical, right? That they're not supposed to be tied to any sort of goals. It's not, if you want to be a certain kind of person, don't kill people. It's just don't kill people. Right? There's not supposed to be an if that comes with them. So it does seem to me, on the other hand, that like the instrumental reading seems a little bit easier for a lot of epistemic norms because it just sort of seems like the goal that comes attached with a lot of epistemic norms is just kind of very straightforwardly, you know, if you want to believe true stuff, right, then do X, Y, and Z, right? Or maybe if you want to get fancy with it, you think about like William James and stuff. Maybe you have two goals that could be in tension that are, you want to believe truths and you want to disbelieve falsehoods, right?
Mm.
And of course, the easiest way to believe truths is just to believe everything. So that'll include all the truths. The easiest way to not believe falsehoods is just not believe anything, right? That way you'll leave out all the falsehoods. So perhaps there's a certain kind of balance between the two, but I think at like a reasonable rough summary, right? If you want to believe true stuff, you know, believe X, Y, and Z. So I think as a general matter, I actually think there might be a principal reason to think that epistemic norms are sort of easier to make sense of often than other kinds of norms. But will that actually help in this case? Maybe not, right? Given the kind of thing we're doing. Like, we might end up in a kind of weird circle if we try to plug that in here. So instead, I'll just say, yeah, look, sure, there might be problems about epistemic objectivity, but like, in order for a view to be plausible, you don't have to have solved every problem in sight in all directions. It just has to be, here's this thing that seems very hard to, make sense of. Here's about the view that, like, here's a view that sort of ties together, like, allows us to hold on to a bunch of separate intuitions and doesn't seem to entail anything crazy. And yeah, maybe there'll be some further issues we'll have to figure out about epistemic norms, but but like, we're just trying to make a contribution here. We're not claiming to have settled everything. So if you are prepared to give the view that pass, then it seems to me that the original thesis is actually sort of surprisingly robustly defensible because look, it's in fact, if you're going to say, okay, we can talk about whether movies are good and then we can talk about whether they're awesome, awesomeness doesn't seem to be intrinsically in any than goodness, right?
Wait, which one's goodness and which one's awesomeness?
Yes, right. So the distinction that's being made here is that between saying that something is like the original accusation against Cale is that he only cares about whether movies are good, whereas I think he should also care about whether they're awesome. And I don't claim to have some nice set of necessary and sufficient conditions for for differentiating these, but I think I can gesture at sufficiently suggestive examples to get across the distinction I'm thinking of here, right? So for example, I think that if you think so Tarantino movies, for example, are I mean, they're pretty good movies, but like but I don't think that they're amazing movies on the in terms of the goodness scale, right? Like on the on the level of your sort of things that you might reasonably put in an AFI top 10 list, right? It's if you think about the best Scorsese or Coppola movies or whatever, I don't think they're as good as all that, right? But they're extremely awesome. And I think perhaps an even clearer example of the distinction I have in mind is if you think about Connery era Bond movies, I think that these are all I think these were all like nicely very competently put together, and I wouldn't say bad or anything, but I don't I'm not gonna I'm not gonna pretend to think that that they have any kind of claim to greatness on the good scale. In fact, I think that they're in fact, I'm sure that there are any number of more artfully put together spy thrillers that are probably on the good scale much better than say Goldfinger or whatever. Nevertheless, the world is full of people who were born long after those movies came out, who love them, and I think that does speak to the quality that I'm thinking of here as awesomeness. And and I think that in the original case about Scorsese, I'm sure you mentioned Taxi Driver earlier, right? Like I'm sure Taxi Driver, for example, I mean, Goodfellas is a very good movie. All of his movies are very good, but I'm sure Taxi Driver, for example, you could make a robust case that it probably beats Goodfellas on the good scale. And but the thing that makes Goodfellas particularly delightful is that it's a very good movie that is also extremely awesome. So that's the I don't know. I think I gave the example of Lars von Trier movies are generally very good, but not always particularly awesome.
Hmm.
So so yeah, I think that and so ultimately the philosophical argument here is that if talking about awesome movies and sort of claiming that as a dimension of evaluation gets um, you know feels very fuzzy, right? This feels like, oh, I'm just sort of sneaking in. I liked it, right? And pretending that it's something beyond that. It's like, yeah, I don't know. I think there's a good company defense here that this is actually ultimately ultimately you can it's pretty closely analogous to the most plausible defense of there being objectively good movies, and you can make a lot of very closely parallel moves here that it's you can only be in a position to judge whether a movie is actually awesome if you've seen enough similar movies that you're not too easily impressed,
Hmm.
that you've given it some time, right? The fact that those Connery Bond movies are still being watched and loved so much by people who were born I mean, I was born 9 years after the last one of those came out, right? Not counting the non-Aeon one later. That I think this counts as sort of human evidence for their awesomeness. And so yeah, I think that it's like on an approximately equal footing, right? It sounds silly, but it's no, it's everything you can say in the defense of the objectivity of good. You can more or less say in defense of the objectivity of awesome, and there seems to be an intuitive distinction. And so I also while I was throwing Kale under the bus in this essay, I didn't name him, but I also threw Jason under the bus a little bit. I think that if you I think people who watch him a lot might have been able to pick up on the fact that I was talking about him. I said a very good friend of mine is often enthuses about his love of ninja movies from the 1980s, and
Oh, I didn't realize that was Jason.
I really enjoy listening to him talk about them. But like I feel very little inclination to go back and watch these movies
I mean, but
because
you two are the horror bros, right?
yeah, exactly. Because I suspect, while I'm sure they're very awesome, I suspect that they're not very good. So they, and again, I think these are two. I think these are two dimensions of evaluating movies. You can, yeah, seen many horror movies with Jason. He has yet to convince me to watch one of these ninja movies, but these are two different dimensions of evaluation. And of course, my point is not that you shouldn't care about whether movies are good. Of course you should, right? But it's the analogy that I use at the end is to Susan Wolf's essay on Moral Saints, where she basically says, look, moral goodness, right? Individual moral virtue is good. It's important, right? It's something we care about. It's something we should care about. But it's not the only kind of human excellence that we admire. And in fact, if pursued so single-mindedly that people would fit the description of moral saints, that the more you think about that, the more that actually gets kind of unappealing. She makes an interesting case in the essay that that we wouldn't want to be friends with moral saints. We wouldn't hope for our children to grow up to be moral saints, not because we're indifferent to morality, right? But just because that's not it. It doesn't exhaust our conception of what it is to be like of human potential, what it is to be an impressive person, all that stuff. And I think something similar is true here. Maybe that obviously I care a great deal about whether movies are good or not, but yeah, I also care about whether they're awesome. Although, to be totally fair about this, Kale actually might turn out to care about that too at the end of the day, because when I was writing this essay, I actually texted him to say, "Hey, what's your favorite Scorsese movie?" And because I wanted to incorporate that, and he said either Taxi Driver or Cape Fear. And it seems to me, okay, Taxi Driver fits my theory of the case, because if all you care about is good, then yeah, I mean that might very well be the Scorsese movie that that you settle on, right, as your favorite. But I love Cape Fear, but I think that's a movie you could only love if the awesome scale is also a big part of your evaluation.
It was funny rewatching June yesterday compared to June 2, which obviously I'd seen much more recently.
Yeah,
Because obviously June 1 is probably my favorite film.
yeah.
Rewatching it, it was also fantastic. But there are about like five or six just like kind of funny quips for like Marvel fans that they've added into the script,
Oh
which
no.
then in June 2 is just not something that exists. So June 1, I guess because it was the first one, hadn't proven itself, does kind of have these nods to normieism, which presumably were included in the trailers, which I never watched. I never watched a June trailer because I wanted to actually watch the movie. And if I want to watch a movie, I'm not going to watch a trailer.
Right.
But yeah, it was interesting compared to June 2, which I think because obviously June 1 had been such a success, June 2 was allowed to be much more uncompromising.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, look, I'll watch. I do watch trailers, right? I don't have that standard, but I will say that I feel like the trend line for trailers is bad,
Mm.
because my grumpy old man complaint here is that it's like I've increasingly felt over the last bunch of years that like I see more and more trailers that like they just tell you like the three-quarters of the movie in the trailer.
Yeah, I
And
think they stopped being advertisements and started to become like products for Indians who like can't watch films. And so you'll get trailers with like a billion views on YouTube because they basically provide like a summary of a film.
yeah, right. It's like, okay, well, yeah, if you're going to make them summaries, then I definitely don't want to watch it if I'm going to watch the movie, right? What you should, a well crafted trailer should be like, and a little bit of atmosphere, maybe some music, and I think it's acceptable but not required to communicate the basic premise of the movie.
Yeah, I think normal
Like,
decent trailers are now called teaser trailers.
yeah. Okay, fair enough. Yeah. So yeah, I'll watch a teaser trailer. I'll be a little upset if I'm going to watch the movie if I have to watch a summary trailer.
Yeah. I had forgotten in June also like how quickly kind of the June one is it's a funny thing. Well, I think with a lot of long movies, you're like that was long, but it still felt rushed.
Yeah.
Like his
Uh,
the
yeah.
whole collapse of their noble kingdom happens like an hour and 20 in. Feels super rushed.
Yeah. That's interesting. I mean, I mean, I also have to say part of my, part of my affinity for horror movies is that, like,
They're all
I,
a tight 90 minutes.
yeah, I mean, my view on this is that 90 minutes is about as long as a movie should be. And I'm not saying that every movie should be 90 minutes because, clearly there are movies that could not be condensed to that without like being much worse. I just think that the default should be about 90 minutes and you should have to earn your right to be longer than that, by like actually needing it for the movie, right? I mean, it's like this is it's like it drives me crazy that we live in an era where every mediocre Marvel movie is the length of The Godfather. It's like, well, why?
Yeah, yeah.
Right? Like why do you need all that time? Right? What are you using it for? Surely you could tell this story in 90 minutes. I mean, and this is like, yeah, I think if you like, yeah, if you have like a 3.5 hour movie, that should require like an investigatory committee and an act of Congress to approve it.
I mean, I love an epic. I'm someone who watched Cloud Atlas,
Oh,
which
wow. Yeah.
is 2 hours 52, and was like, oh, that kind of ended a bit abruptly for me. But that's just because I had a delusion throughout it that the point was that all these stories were going to come together, when that wasn't the point of Cloud Atlas.
So knowing that, if like if you tried to rewatch it,
No, no, I haven't rewatched it.
yeah, see,
I
yeah,
very rarely rewatch or reread or do anything. 'Cause
yeah, sure. I'd
My
just be
memory's
very
too sharp.
interested in. Well, I mean, look, I do think it's I do think it's a mark of a good movie that it rewards rewatching and
No, yeah,
you
I
know
was going to also mention that it felt like with the whole humane thing, it's also important for good or awesome. I can't remember. It's still not really clear in your distinction and which one's
yeah,
which. But for you to watch a movie twice or to watch a piece of media twice or whatever, because a lot of kind of an awesome impression of a movie can come from the fact of like being impressed by a twist, but not in
yeah,
the kind of sense of like a storytelling.
yeah,
A twist
yeah,
is like a way to fool you and to appreciate that on an aesthetic level. But like the actual just be like, oh fuck, I didn't think that was going to happen. And I think you
yeah,
kind of need to
right.
get over that kind of feeling to give a proper assessment of a movie.
Yeah, like and yeah, not all so yeah, okay, first the good awesome distinction is like good is sort of pure aesthetic quality, the sort of let's put it this way, good is the sort of is the sort of scale of evaluation that's most, that like, when people start using words like cinema and film instead of movie, uh you know you're
Kino, this is Kino.
you're probably in the presence of that, fixation on that scale of evaluation, right? It's like the sort of the cinematic equivalent of like literary merit, right? And awesome is the feature that, again, Sean Connery era James Bond movies have, that it's like there's obviously a sense in which those are not great cinema, but nevertheless, right? There is a sort of there is a sense in which they deserve a high positive evaluation,
I
and
know. I mean,
that's
I thought that was what you meant, but I got confused when you started talking about like Sean Connery going down the generations, which then
yeah, yeah. Well, so the point there is just that like the human points about quality, a lot of them can be transferred to discussions of awesomeness, right? That's like, look, part of how you can tell that something's actually an awesome movie is that it doesn't just strike people that way when, I don't know, Goldfinger comes out in 1971 or whatever, but like it continues to people continue to find it so when they weren't even born then. And if they've watched it long
right, and there's
after.
a
But
kind of a relation to like technical innovations, right? Like part
yeah,
of what makes June 2021 better than June 1984 is technical innovations, but there's also a lot more to it where just like June
yeah,
1984 was a bit of a mess, regardless of any technical achievements.
Yeah, and I think that there's a larger sense of quality, right, on either the good or awesome scale that it's the technical innovations can help with, right? But it's like, look, I mean, for example, something that pissed many people off at the time is oh no, uh, is that I like many people when Blade Runner 2049 came out were very impressed by that movie, and I was not. And and I think that that's like, I think that's probably already failed the Hume test. Like, I don't know how many people are particularly into Blade Runner 2049 in the year 2024, right? Like, I think it might have already the sort of like, ooh, look how pretty that is, uh, reaction to it, might have already faded away by now, and it's sort of very forgettable, right? I think people are still going to watch the original Blade Runner, uh, you know, um, which again, I don't think is like extra amazing or whatever, but I think it's much better, for way longer than like I think they're going to continue to do so. Whereas I think Blade Runner 49 to 20 long since fade into memory. But yeah, I think that the rewatching point is important, and like even with twists that like look like M Night Shyamalan,
Shyamalan.
uh, like his movies by and large, like even the relatively good ones, uh, relative to that oeuvre, right? Like you can watch twice, but that's
Mm,
it, right? You watch it once, you're bowled over by the twist, then you watch it twice to see what you missed, and then you're just kind of done, right?
yeah,
Like it'd be sort of weird to watch it a third time because like what's the point? Whereas like I don't know, Fight Club, right? That's a movie with like a big twist at the end. It's like what I don't know. I've and these are very self-consciously not snooty movie recommendations, any of them, but like even within that range, right? It's like, yeah, it's like, yeah, I don't know, I've probably seen Fight Club like a dozen times over the years, right? And it rewards that, right? Because it's not entirely, it's not all depend, it's not all dependent on the twist. Like, it's like the actual experience leading up to that is good enough that that even if exactly. In fact, I think the first time I ever watched Fight Club, it was like on TV at a friend's house, and I watched the last 10 minutes. And I was like, "Oh, that looked cool. What is that?" you
I love.
know?
Do you know what I did as a kid? Um, I watched Matrix 2 and 3, but then not. I watched Matrix 2 and 3, but then not the first one for like 10 years.
Uh,
It's incredible that we had our first fire alarm of the day
yeah,
during a podcast.
yeah. I will say that yes, DC Joe Black says the bunker has been compromised. Evacuate, evacuate.
The IDF
Yeah,
coming.
yeah. Uh, look, I think that I'm sorry, I got so distracted. What were you saying just before that? Before the fire
Uh,
alarm?
I was talking about the Matrix. How I saw 2 and
Yes,
3, not the
yes,
third one.
yes. Yeah, I think that I will say uh I don't think the Matrix 2 or 3 were particularly good movies, but certainly way worse. Uh yeah, I actually at first thought that was on my end too. Uh it wasn't until you muted yourself and it stopped that I realized like, oh, that's not here. Uh, um, but yeah, look, I think those were pretty bad movies, but and again, um, I think the first Matrix, it's not amazing, but it's a very well done, fun action movie, and 2 and 3 are much more forgettable. Although I will also say they're way better than the one they made a few years ago.
Yeah, I mean that was also, as I'm sure you would critique, very long.
Yes, that was very long, and you felt every minute of it.
I think there is definitely a thing where like every movie that wants to be taken seriously now is like, well, we have to be at least 2.5.
Yeah, exactly right. It's like, oh yeah, yeah, it's a nothing, right? It's like, yeah, you're barely even a movie, right? If you're less than 2 hours long, I hate it so much. But yeah, I think, and I actually think that the 2021 or whatever that was Matrix movie
Yeah.
was, which actually, I, I was kind of excited when I saw the preview, right? Because the preview was all
No, I mean,
about,
I to be clear, I watched it and I enjoyed it, but I don't think, as we would say, I don't think it's a good movie.
yeah, 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 yeah. Uh, I enjoyed the first part of the movie, which is what the preview was all about.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in a weird way that made me hate the overall movie even more because the fact that the first part was so much fun made me resent the shitty second part even more. Like it's
Yeah, like the first half was like a weird middle-aged, like psychological thriller kind of drug thing, and then it just went back to Guncatter at the end.
yeah, exactly, right. And it's like, yeah, you started with this really interesting movie and then you did the Dusk Till Dawn channel change and you did like a much shittier version of the first three
Yeah,
movies.
yeah.
So it's like, no, you gotta, if you're gonna do that, it would have to be the other way around, right? That's like we at least get the good part at the end, right? That's, if you have the good part at the beginning and then it's awful, that actually makes the
They
awfulness the
should have just
awful
made
part worse.
if they'd made a 90-minute movie, they couldn't have done that. They would have done the gun bit, then ran out.
Well, see, that'd be perfect.
Ben confirmed true.
Fair enough.
At one point, I was leaning really close to my camera because I was like, "Wait, I thought that was the cat. But what if it's actually Lucy?" But no, then I was like, "No, it's a cat."
No, no, no. That is definitely the cat. That's speaking of movies, right? That's Ash.
Mm.
Since he was adopted, so the cat I used to have, went with my ex-wife in the divorce. So, but last year, the Hollywood Forever Cemetery posted on their Facebook page there were a bunch of like stray kittens they were feeding there. So he was one of them. So
All right,
I figured since he was adopted from a cemetery in Hollywood, he should have a horror movie name, hence Ash.
bros from the streets.
Exactly. Exactly.
Great.
Yeah,
What do
Lucy's
you?
under the desk, but no.
Well, actually, before I ask what you've been writing last week, what have you written these past few weeks? And is there anything where like you're
Sure, yeah.
you're
Uh,
struggling, you're desiring to cover?
I am open to covering any of it.
Mm.
The last few weeks that, yeah, I mean, so we had both been busy. By the way, I never said this, but like, congratulations, Dr. Bertram Lee, right? Is that
No, no, I haven't done my Viva yet. I've just handed it in.
okay? All right, all right, all right. Premature, but
I need to
but yes,
orally defend myself.
right, right, yes. Uh, which is a weird thing. At least my experience was that it's like amazing how high stakes that feels, considering that like you actually do intellectually know that there is a 0.00 chance that they would let you get to that point if they weren't planning to give it to you. Right, like but it still feels like, oh shit, this is this like
Well,
giant
yeah, I mean,
moment.
I
You
guess
know?
you just don't want to come away with having to do major revisions. It's not
Yeah,
you're
yeah,
actually going to fail, but like you're
yeah,
hoping to be, like you probably have a job or whatever. You've done like you've moved on with your life. You don't want to go back to your PhD and have to
yeah.
do like a load of bullshit to it.
Fair enough. But yeah, it still somehow feels high. I think it still inappropriately feels higher stakes than that.
Oh no,
But
I'm sure I'll be like dying of anxiety.
yeah,
Oh, it's also because I get anxious for the first time I ever do things, and hopefully I'll never have to. I can't think of any circumstance where I'll have to do this again. So
yeah,
inevitably, the
yeah,
first one will be anxious.
yeah, exactly. Okay, so the last few things that we did we do one on the I don't think we did. No. So yeah, because we have been like basically it's been a combination of me uh, being pressed for time since I took on a number of commitments this semester that are like jointly unsustainable, and
Classic academic bants.
yeah, and for the first month of the semester, I was like fully in driving back and forth every week, from Rosarito to LA and back mode. And now I'm relaxed a little bit with that. I'm doing the lowest rent possible version of having residences in two countries. That in both the larger and also the strict sense of low rent that I have. I'm the rent of the place in Rosarito is obviously silly cheap, and I'm renting a room, the room in which I'm in fact right now in Los Angeles, so I don't have to like drive back.
I was looking at your room and I was like, damn, it's actually worse than my room for once.
Yeah. Uh, so so yeah, this is so I'm doing that. So they'll calm down a little bit, although I'm still extremely busy. Be very unsurprised if you see several Stefan solo ones coming up.
Yeah,
But
unfortunately, I haven't been able to do a lot of solo ones because I've been busy. I was busy finishing my PhD,
PhD,
so I
yeah,
wasn't able to do the first one until last week.
right, exactly. But yeah, so I think the last one we actually covered was the Mike Beggs one, the viable socialism. Is that right?
Yeah, which is kind of crazy. I think the other ones, the should the next two Marx ones, I think, were out at that time, but we didn't cover them.
So we have the Marx thinks value predates capitalism. Did Rawls kill analytical Marxism? There's the Walter Block one. There's the Jeremy Kaufman one. Are souls randomly assigned to bodies? So about Jeremy Kaufman saying he couldn't. That it's silly to say that he could have been a Haitian because actually he couldn't be because he's a unique product of his ancestry. Uh, and and so it is obviously he's like a demented racist twit, but there is actually a little bit of an interesting issue there about the sort of Kripkean stuff about like the necessity of identity, right? Is it like which things could it be counterfactually true of you that these would still count as alternate versions of you rather than a different person? Um, so yeah, any of those I would be perfectly happy to do if any of those tickle your fancy. If you want to go back and do one of those next week, I think that maybe the one of I guess probably the one on value theory. I think in some ways
Yeah,
we've
yeah.
talked we've talked about a bit in different ways. And the one on Rawls and analytical Marxism, I think that is probably it covers it in a different way, but I think probably covers ground that we've talked about a bunch of times in different ways. So probably probably if we were going to do one of the essays in between the last stream we did together and this one, it should either be the Walter Block one or the necessity of identity one, or souls randomly assigned to bodies.
Both are about
Uh,
libertarians, right?
yeah, exactly. Yes. Uh,
We do
yeah.
love to dunk on the libs, the real libs.
Yeah, exactly. As they themselves sometimes like to point out, they are the real liberals. Yeah. Yes. Uh, yeah. So yes. So yeah, both of those are about libertarians who are in different ways. I mean, the art, souls randomly assigned to bodies one is sort of barely about politics. I mean, it's about a libertarian, but I mean, it's really about the sort of taking the metaphysical claim that he's making probably more seriously than it deserves to be taken and sort of exploring it. Uh,
Which is great fun to have. What else are you
yeah,
doing in philosophy blog?
yeah, and then but yeah, then the Walter Block one. Wait, which one of us is the libertarian? Is much more straightforwardly political because that's about it's about Walter Block being simultaneously in theory an ultra libertarian, but also somehow an ultra Zionist, and those things seeming very hard to square to me. Uh, but In any case, so yeah, either of those could be fun. I'd be happy to do either of those. The what is coming up next week, because there wasn't a new one today. See above being stupidly busy, but I did post like a little note with unlocking an old one and giving a preview of the upcoming one and some other stuff. So the one that's coming up for next week is about Philip Goff, who we previously met when he was arguing with Sabine Hassenfelder about electrons.
Mm.
And he had this much discussed essay in Aeon magazine where he's decided that he's some sort of strange heretical Christian now. And
Ugh,
so
come on, man.
so so there you have it. So yeah, so next week I guess we'll either be talking about that Walter Block or our souls randomly assigned to bodies.
You know the Nietzsche quote about how God is dead, but for a very long time his name may echo among the caves? Man, his name is echoing really fucking loud lately
Yeah, fair enough.
among Western so called intellectuals. Okay, bye everyone.